This is a disclaimer. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only, and the concepts that are discussed in this episode have not been fact-checked. Some topics brought up in this episode may be triggering for you, and if you are struggling with mental health issues, then please see a mental health professional.
Hello, welcome back to Unhinged, episode 3, with Tessa and Lera. My name's Tessa. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland.
And yeah, welcome everyone. I can't believe we're at episode 3.
Yeah, I know.
So my name's Lera. I'm a PhD candidate in clinical psychology. I'm also a provisional psychologist. People are kind of catching on to this idea of this, that it might be a sustainable thing.
Might be a sustainable
Yeah,
I feel like you do one podcast and people are like, that was a one-off, and then you do a second and they're like, okay.
I can't believe these two.
I feel like you do a third. And then it's like, and then I feel like also maybe we're a little bit more at ease now. We know maybe we know a little bit what we're doing.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I think we're getting there, you know. But we have an episode coming up today where it's going to be a little bit less clinical as opposed to the first two that we've spoken about. But the topic that we wanted to cover today is this idea of personality types, personality characteristics, and all of these tests that are offered in a society like a Myers-Briggs or a Big Five that tell you essentially what your personality is and how you can use those things to your advantage.
I suppose, you know, you might be familiar with them if you've ever gone for certain like graduate roles. A lot of like corporations are starting to use them a lot more, which I kind of don't really like. I don't know, because I mean they're all like official tests and things, but you might, like, if you're in an interview process, it's not uncommon these days for them to throw a personality test at you and sort of, I guess, like, so that they're looking for certain personality types that will fit their culture.
And I think that, you know, when you're talking about the different kinds of roles that you go for, I've gone in a couple of years ago, like for retail roles, for example, and even then they had a personality test. For an application.
I kind of hate it in a way, and I only because I think that like personality tests do give you and there are very valid and accurate reliable tests that we use in psychology, like for like even like clinical purposes. There are good measures, but I think at the same time it only provides you ever with like a snapshot. It is only self-report information that someone gives you, like, and while it can be accurate to a bit, I think people are so unbelievably complex, and when you boil them down to like 5 personality types on a piece of paper, you're still losing a lot of information. It can still be an accurate measure of like this thing, but I don't think it's like, I don't know, that's my like opinion anyway.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that people often really cling to this identity of a personality type, and I think we see that with this Myers-Briggs test, which we can talk about. Chances are you have heard of it. It's this 16 personality type.
Yeah, and like ENFJ,
INFJ, ESP, something.
Yeah, all the letters.
There's all these letters that stand for something within that personality type. But I have noticed that a lot of people, particularly young people, which this personality test I do think is marketed towards. Yeah. Because it is one of the personality tests that's really marketed, which is the reason that it's so big.
It's so easily accessible. It's the first one that'll come up if you Google personality tests. Like, whereas like valid and reliable like clinical measures might be, you know, you might have to pay to use them, like, or like they're not like super easily accessible to the public. There definitely are tests out there that you can do and pay for, and that will give you a much more accurate, if you did want to do a personality test. But Myers-Briggs is like number one, like the most. It's so frequently used, and I guess to some extent it's not an evidence-based recommended personality test.
And this is what I was saying is like young people I think young people in particular, but I could be wrong here. It's just something that I've seen. They depend on, they get this label of their personality, and then they get this label of other people's personality, and they ask for someone's personality, like on the Myers-Briggs, and then they say, "Oh, okay, I understand you now," and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to get to, is that that's wrong.
That's wrong. Yeah. It's like you can look up the origin of the Myers-Briggs. It was like intended to be a personality test for like workplaces and things like that. But yeah, it isn't the most rock solid and most valid test, and we don't recommend it, like giving you an actual. I mean, it's a bit of fun. Don't not do it. It's not going to give you the opposite information. It's not going to tell you something completely wacko, but it's not what we would consider like a accurate or valid measure of your personality. But I think like people find that a bit of fun, because they feel like they've like, oh well, like, okay, cool, I've got this like 4-letter identity now, like and like, oh, you and I might get along because we're both NFJs.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You're an I, but we like us, like, I don't know, and it's like that's yeah.
So in preparation for this episode, I actually took this test yesterday to remind myself, but it came back with the same thing that it always comes back with, that you highly disagreed on when I texted you with it.
Yeah.
So I came back with an INFJ.
Yep.
You're an ENFJ.
Right.
And I texted you, and you were like, there is no way.
There is no way
that you are introverted.
So the poll, like, of the dimension of the personality test, of the Myers-Briggs at least, and this is probably the part that's actually quite accurate, I would say, like, because introversion, extroversion is quite easy to measure.
It is, and it's been very well validated as well. So it's like you copy that scale.
Most people know innately, like, if they lean towards more introversion or extroversion as well, like, it's a very solid, easy thing to like measure. So when you're an extrovert, it means that you are like gain energy and you enjoy the company of other people, and that energizes you, makes you feel really good. You like being around other people. And if you're an introvert, you gain a lot of energy and satisfaction out of being more alone, and being with other people drains you a bit. So I guess like it could be like sort of fluid as well. You're not like binary, like one or the other.
Yes, and there's also ambiverts that are in the middle of the scale.
There you go. Yeah, people can have like, it's a spectrum, right? So you can fall anywhere in between there. So I am a super extrovert, and I think I'm becoming more introverted as I get a bit older, and I'm slowing down a bit. But you came back with like introversion, right?
And solid introversion.
So not ambivert, like
no,
boom,
not
straight.
an ambivert. Actually, what I've noticed, I've taken these tests like out of high school, and it came back with extroversion or even ambivert a couple of times. But as I'm getting older, it's like a 90% introvert. Right. It's not even close to the middle or extroversion. And I do see that in my behavior in life. But I think that it definitely doesn't show.
No. Well, I think this is where like we sometimes confuse like shyness and like anxiety with introversion, because introverts don't have to be like, I think when we think of an introvert, we think of someone who is like terrified of talking to other people, which is not true. I mean, maybe yes. I mean, I would say if someone's like highly socially anxious and they enjoy their own company a lot more, they're probably more likely to be an introvert. But you can have introverts that really do like enjoy their own company, get a lot of energy from that. Other people drain them a lot, but when they're out doing like when you're working with people, you're like very active. Like I wouldn't consider you like a shy person or like socially anxious at all. And so I think that's where like that's where like the two constructs are like not lining up. And in my head I was like, wait, really? Like you're an introvert? But when I think about it, right, you do a lot of like things on your own, and like you enjoy like working out of the office as well, like in your own like whereas I'm very like, I need to be in the office and I need to be like around people to like do work and stuff, whereas you really enjoy like, okay, I need my peace and I need to be away from all these people.
I can't concentrate around people. I think that's definitely another thing, but surely it's got to be related to introversion and some sort of way.
I think so. Like, I mean, you're like, that's where I guess if you're at peace and a lot of comfort is by like being alone, whereas I'm at peace and at comfort when I'm like at a rave.
Yeah.
Like, not a rave, but like a, around people. I enjoy just that. And if I'm alone for too long, then I start to get a bit like, who can I annoy?
Yeah.
Like, I need to go talk to someone.
See, I'm so happy being alone. I love being alone. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have my set of very close friends that I keep very close to my heart, and I go to them when like I need something or when they need something. They can come to me, and I welcome that. But the thought of being in a group, for example, in a group dynamic, like there is, to me, in a group dynamic, I'm a terrible leader. I'm a terrible communicator in a group dynamic. It's just something that doesn't work very well with me unless I mentally prepare myself, unless, like, for example, if it's like a mental health group, I can most definitely put on that facade, and if I have a script to go by or in a meeting, for example, I can put it on and work with it if it's a planned thing. But if we end up in a group of people, like if we end up in a group of people in the office, for example, of like 10 people, I'm extremely uncomfortable.
Now that I do think about it like more intently, like, yeah, I haven't often seen you like be around like or chase up a big group of people, but you do say that it's like, I like, but I think at the same time, like, I would nominate you as a leader. Like,
that's
if we were going
so
to,
weird.
yeah, and I think that's got something slightly different to do with like personality traits, but I think also like people who don't want to be in charge usually are the best people to be in charge.
Well, this is the thing, right, is, okay, so we're looking at the Myers-Briggs, and yes, there isn't a lot of validity to it, but there is an ENFJ and an INFJ, okay? So inherently we're supposed to be the same on 3 different sets of characteristics.
Yeah.
Except for the extroversion and the introversion. When I looked up an ENFJ, apparently that it, like, leadership is the main quality that separates us. So, like, you're supposed to be a fantastic leader.
Right.
And I have seen that.
To an extent, I think, like, I enjoy, like, rounding people up to do office drinks, or, like, you know what I mean? Like, leading the group to do something social.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to, like, and, you know, maybe, or doing something fun collectively, if I was going to organize I don't know, like a party or something like that. Like that, those social things, like I do like being the like mum of that. That's okay. But when it comes to like positions of power, and I have to like lead people for work, and there's no power dynamic. So like I'm leading people who are on par with me, that's scary, and I get very anxious and stressed out by that. But you can already see that Myers-Briggs there, like that definition is like already taken differences in just one dimension, which is introversion, extroversion, and automatically assumed like I would be a good leader and you would not. And I think that's that's like a dangerous take. This is where Myers-Briggs is like, I don't think a good idea, because it really does depend. Again, like I don't mind rounding up the girls for Friday margaritas, that's fine. I'm very happy to be the leader there, but it's way more nuanced. Like, but I really don't think I'm a great leader. I don't deal well under work pressure very well when I'm instructing other people. Yeah. So then no. Whereas I actually would put you in a position, I would nominate you because I feel like you handle stress a lot better than me. And so I think you would thrive under a situation where you had to lead a group of people for work. I don't know. Anyway,
I think that's the sort of that terrifies me. But I mean,
I think I think the outcome would maybe result in less of a breakdown.
Well, so you know that observation that you've just made.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've been listening to a podcast about my personality type. This is like a Myers-Briggs podcast, and I mean, like you might experience this as well if you like look at your results of a Myers-Briggs or listen to like a podcast about your particular personality type. I've like never been more offended, but also just I didn't relate to a lot of the things that people are saying in this podcast, and I do think that they are personality researchers. I think that they do have an idea of what they're talking about, but there's certain aspects of it where I was like, this isn't my lived experience whatsoever.
Right.
There's certain things that they said where I'm like, oh, I could totally relate to this. This is incredible. But there's other things that they said that, and it didn't describe my experience. It just simply did not. So what I'm trying to say by that is take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Like, it doesn't, it's just providing, like, one, like, two-dimensional, like, layer of, like, okay, this is maybe, like, a ballpark of you, but you are so much more complex than that, than, like, some self-report items on a scale. You are, like, a human being that reacts in, like, so many different contexts. It's just measuring one context when it's doing that. So it can give you an idea, but it isn't perfectly descriptive. And you might find it's like, oh, you might find yourself thinking, like, I am an extrovert in these particular situations, but in these particular situations, I think of myself as an introvert. And, like, that's humans. Like, humans are so complex, and, like, you can sort of lean more one way than the other, but again, like, it isn't like, you know, we shouldn't walk around the world with, like, INFJ, like, plastered on your forehead and being like, this is who I am, because you are way more multifaceted than just that.
Most definitely.
And that's the other thing too. So like you were saying, like, this podcast that's taking, you know, Myers-Briggs personalities and talking about them quite in depth. Again, it's just like one test, and, like, making all these extra judgments on who this person is. Now we're starting to get into, like, horoscope land almost. It's like, this is kind of who you are. This is who you need to be. And, like, even some Myers-Briggs ones do get a little bit horoscopy, where they start telling you how you should behave based on your personality type, which
I really love how you just related that to this idea of horoscopes, because horoscopes is kind of the, like, it's almost like the woo-woo baby of personality.
It is,
tests and
it's
telling you who you are,
and it's entirely made up.
It is entirely
made up. They've done tests where, like, people have all received in the same room, all received a horoscope that's like, this is, like, related to your star sign. Does it relate to you? And everyone in the room's been like, yep, absolutely. And they all received the same, like, prediction. So then they were all like, no, this is very unique to me right now. And so it taps into that, and that's kind of predatory. I have beef with horoscopes. I mean, if that gives you some sort of comfort and you, like, are into star signs and stuff, that's great. But there is no evidence, like, behind the existence of, like, horoscopes or them being accurate at all. But so it's like I think that's where, like, personality trait tests can go a bit wrong, is when people try and, like, overly predict who you are and what your life is going to look like because of this one test.
Yeah. And I think that it can go wrong where people really, even know that that's not their human experience, they try and morph their perception and attach it to certain labels within that personality test, and then as soon as they start to relate to them, they might then kind of walk around everyday life thinking that, like, oh, I can't behave this way because I'm a label. So now self-fulfilling prophecy. Now you've got a self-fulfilling prophecy where the personality test is, or your personality outcomes on that test are determining how you're behaving in everyday life, who you're interacting with, those sorts of things.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's probably, like, again, if you are going to do a personality test, know that it's just, like, a little snapshot who you might be, but shouldn't dictate your life. Shouldn't dictate who you're friends with either, because that's another thing too. It's like, be like,
oh yeah, it does.
I'm an ENFJ, therefore I should hang out with these kinds of people. I see that on Reddit a lot. It's like, so and so, I've started a new relationship and they just happen to be an ISTP. What do I do? It's like, no, that's
I have had that for the last, like, I don't know, over 10 years with my partner, right? We're like high school sweethearts, and he's a Taurus and I'm an Aries, and we're meant to be, like, the worst, most incompatible couple.
I'm an Aries too. That's crazy.
So we're meant to be, like, super incompatible, and we've been together for a very long time. Smooth sailing. We've got a baby. Like,
Damn, but, like, Okay. Do other people like ask you what your star sign is?
Yeah, a lot of yes.
Taurus, like,
and so they go, oh, you're an Aries. Like, I'm gonna run away from you.
Yeah. So does
absolutely
Aries
bonkers.
has this weird like stereotype, I guess, of being like aggressive or something like that.
I see Aries as like a fire emoji.
Right.
where
Like
there's-
boom, like
yes,
explosive. Right.
absolutely.
I just feel like this is the thing, though. This is where horoscopes annoy me, because you could describe anybody as like that. I mean,
Absolutely.
maybe and then when you meet someone who happens to be who would describe as like extremely cool, calm, and collected, they just like, and it's like, oh well, I'm an Aries, and I'm, and then there's people that'll say, oh well, like, oh, you're not explosive in this way, and then they'll make a justification for it. It's like, maybe you're explosive in like other ways, and it's kind of like, you make justifications for horoscopes. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So, and you kind of readapt it to make it fit yourself. That's my beef with horoscopes anyway. And also to some extent personality tests, because people start to then act the way they think they should based on this test. So.
Also, I do think the one area where it might be beneficial is if you do look at the way that you might behave in like a workplace or something.
Yeah.
Because if you hone in on your strengths, then you can really sort of.
So a personality test could highlight like what your strengths might be, which can be really useful in that regard. So there's definitely benefit to like understanding yourself, and maybe doing one of these tests, especially and to look at where you can improve on a real validated personality test, which is called the Neo Big Five. You might have heard of the Big Five personality traits. So there is introversion, extroversion. There's what is there now? Neuroticism.
Neuroticism. Yeah, introversion, extroversion, conscientiousness,
openness, and agreeableness. Yeah. So those, you can do tests that like assess where you're at on those axes or those dimensions, and within those Big Five personality traits, there's like sub-constructs as well. It gets like quite complex. So like if you're someone who is, so me for example, I've done one of these personality tests before. I'm quite agreeable. I'm very agreeable actually. I fall like above the 85th percentile, which is, a very small tail of the population for agreeableness. And that agreeableness is like your tendency to like harmony and to keep harmony when you're talking to someone. So people who are agreeable can be very friendly, like and likable. And they like harmony. They don't like making arguments. They like the group to kind of flow, and but the cost of that being too agreeable might mean that you're kind of a pushover. And so you might, people in a group might be saying something that you don't agree with, but because you value the harmony of that, you can sort of just go along with it, even though you're going against your own values, which can be a bad thing about agreeableness. But it's a good thing in a lot of ways, because people like working with you. And if you're highly agreeable, you're typically quite friendly. People gravitate towards you. You know, people will listen to you. If you're too disagreeable, maybe you're very in line with your values, but no one wants to work with you because you are so argumentative and you are so like.
It's my way or the highway.
Yeah, and like bossy and like that.
Very type A.
very, very, very type A. Yeah. So so basically, if you do one of these personality tests, they can point you in the right direction. So for me, it was like, oh, I'm very agreeable. I'm almost too agreeable, and maybe that's something I can work on. Not like being less friendly, but working on voicing my own opinion a little bit more.
Assertiveness, right?
But yeah, being more assertive so that I'm not a pushover.
Yeah.
Because the consequence of being a bit of a pushover is that you become resentful later on and like quite bitter. And so so that's where like a personality test has been really beneficial for me. Being like, because you can work, if you're on one extreme of one of the personality traits, you can sort of work to try, you're not stuck there. It isn't like who you are forever, and you are likely going to change as your life goes on, but it can give you an idea of like maybe where you can try and improve in your life.
This isn't fact checked, but
Right.
as a side note,
Yeah.
with that big five, I swear it was someone of a high status who taught us the big five that said this. Apparently, and you know the person that I'm talking about, apparently the big five, you can't actually take it until you're about 25 years old, because that is when your personality is concrete.
Right.
That's when your personality
Well, I mean-
actually sets.
I don't know about that. I don't remember anybody saying that to me. But what I would say is that isn't what we do know about, like, adolescence, at least, is that there's a rapid tumultuous stage of finding your own identity.
Yes.
So there's a
Yes.
lot, and like there's a reason that that teenagers are often not diagnosed with personality disorders, right?
Yeah, you can't until you're 18.
Until you're 18, right? So you're like, because there's a lot of, I guess there's so much change going on that it might not be a valid snapshot of who you are just yet when you're, I don't know about 25. I know that's like the 25 is the rate at which your brain is apparently supposed to be finished developing and your prefrontal cortex is fully on.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make like no sense at all. But I don't know. Again, yeah.
And then that opens up room for like a very philosophical conversation of when is your personality set?
Right. Like who are you? And I guess at the same time, like, I mean, you probably could, like, you can take the test when you're a bit younger, I guess, as a teenager, but just understand that it could change in your person. You might very well become a totally different person by the time you're 25. So it'd be worth taking again when you're a bit older and see how many things have changed. And so, but I also think, like, if you take it a bit too young as well, then young people are quite susceptible to, like, identity labels and stuff like that. So I can see it being quite harmful in to a certain extent of teenagers being a bit more like, well, this is who I am, so I'm going to behave this way, and then allowing that to shape their personality rather than them shaping their own personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about this idea of the self and like identifying with labels, and this is more of a philosophical perspective, but if anyone's into a guy or knows of a guy called Sam Harris, he's got his own podcast called Waking Up with Sam Harris, but he's also, Making Sense with Sam Harris, I believe is his podcast, but he has also written a book that is largely philosophical, but it is backed by a lot of research. I didn't fully get through the book, to be fair, because it was a very in-depth philosophical argument that I personally just didn't have time to understand, didn't necessarily want to understand. But he talks about this idea of the self and how it essentially doesn't exist. He thinks that the self is something kind of that we've made up. So he uses examples, right, of like having like can you pinpoint where you experience the self, or this thing called the I, he calls it. I. So like, who am I? And he goes out to try and essentially prove that I doesn't necessarily exist in a number of ways. So, I mean, you're a self-researcher.
Yeah.
What do you have?
Not so much in the philosophical sense, but like I study like egocentric cognitions and like how self-related stuff can affect cognitions on some, like, less a philosophical level, more like a attention and memory level. But the way I think about it, and again, this is more and I haven't read this book. I probably should read this book. Sounds interesting. But I have had arguments with people before about like the premise of the self. And the way I see it, at least, and this is just like a Tessa Clarkson opinion, right? So just, again, not fact checked, and I don't think anybody knows the true answer to this either. But the human body is made up of so many different systems, and your brain is so unbelievably complex. You're all in, like, right now, your heart is, like, your brain is making your heart beat, your brain is telling your digestive system to like work on digesting breakfast. It's your brain is telling your limbs to move. Your brain is conducting your entire nervous system. Your brain is also thinking about several different things you need to do today. My brain right now is thinking about what I'm going to say next. There's so many things going on. And if you were to conceptualize all of those systems working, and you, instead of thinking of yourself as one person, you thought of yourself as just like a system of multiple moving parts, I think your brain would break. I think it's an easy way to think of ourselves by imagining the self as like a what's referred to as like a ghost in the machine. So a lot of you might think about, okay, like your body is not you, right? Well, if you think about where the self is, I imagine me driving my body as if it were a car, right? This is my vessel and I live inside of it. The I lives somewhere in maybe my heart and my brain. There's this, and obviously like, you know, that might be incorrect. Like as Sam Harris might be saying, it's like, you know, that doesn't actually exist. But I think it is an easy way for humans to conceptualize themselves for survival. Because again, if you were to try and understand and fathom everything happening at once, it might not be efficient. But thinking of yourself as oneself, that's efficient. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that is why I think the self is important. And it's also good for your well-being to imagine yourself as like someone or something that needs to be taken care of, right? And instead of just being like, oh, I'm just this body and I'm just this organism, I'm just reacting to stimuli, which is true, but like I think humans have so much higher order complex thinking that we need to stick to an identity or the self.
To cling on to something.
I think we need it for survival. And I think without it, we deteriorate. I think that's where a lot of like, you know, and then you can talk to different clinicians about this. That's why when you go to therapy, they try and pinpoint what your values are. They try and like put the self back together and say like, who are you though? Because that allows you to be quite robust against the world, and it stops you from becoming so depressed because you don't know who you are and whatever. I don't know.
I think that it's actually like treading a fine line, because in meditation, for example, you try and teach this idea of like just watching your thoughts go by,
right?
Just watching and that can involve identity thoughts, for example, of who you actually are, and this idea of hinging or clinging onto an identity can be really detrimental in terms of the way that you function if the identity that you're clinging onto is very maladaptive, or a thought that you're clinging onto is very maladaptive. For example, that if you think that the world is dangerous and you hold on to that thought and you don't see that thought as a thought, but you see that thought as dictating a whole lot of feelings and behaviors, you're going to go through everyday life essentially doing things that are not going to benefit you in the long term, because you're getting some sort of instant gratification by fulfilling that particular thought, right? Like you're getting some sort of satisfaction by thinking that if the world is dangerous, I'm gonna go to bed, I'm gonna sleep in bed. Your brain is reinforced instantly because you do have an instant feeling of comfort. However, ultimately, that's not going to serve you because you can develop depression, for example. Yeah,
of course. So, while you might be physically... That goes back to what we said on the last episode, is that your brain doesn't care about making you happy. It cares about survival.
Yeah.
So, that's where sometimes, negative thoughts and beliefs about the world can be, harming, because if they're just thoughts and they're not based in, actual fact...
Yeah.
Then they can, you start living by them, they can make you miserable. Yeah.
So it's kind of, to me, it's treading a fine line between and this is the more that I talk about it, the more I realize how difficult this concept is to grapple with and maneuver around your kind of everyday world. Because say you do have a higher order self, and there's lots of meditations that say get you to picture your higher order self, or your kind of higher self in this form, and you can picture like what this person looks like, how they behave, blah blah blah, then you could also argue that, well, you're creating an ideal self that might not actually be realistic for you to achieve in your form.
True, but you can live towards it. You know, you can start behaving in the same way that if you had a belief that the world was a terrible place, and you might start believing that and manifesting that, and then seeing evidence of the world being terrible, and then because you're sort of reinforcing that every day, and then you can live by that idea and then feel terrible about the world, you know, and to some extent, the world is a terrible place, but the world is also a very beautiful place. And you can, and there's also something absolutely incredible about each individual person. Like, the odds of humans existing are just so rare, and the odds of a particular individual, like you or I, existing is like we shouldn't be here. I mean, I've heard like Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about this. It's like not even 1 in a million. It's like 1 in not even a zillion. It's just such a small odd that you are even here right now in this moment as a human being. And I think every single human should feel like they are valuable and special, and you know, have this, and everybody has can have like an ideal to move towards, and that can create like fulfillment and can inspire people to do well in their lives. And when people do well in their lives, they feel happy, and it makes the world a better place. It isn't even just for them and making them feel good. It actually makes the world a better place when people live by positive, strong values. Yeah.
It is comforting in a sense to know that you are a special human being, that you have a unique purpose in life, and that no matter what you're going through right now, that there is something positive to come. There is kind of that.
Absolutely.
You do have something to bring into the world.
I think it is almost a crime to not allow yourself to thrive and to see yourself as valuable. I think it actually really, it upsets me so much if I see someone who thinks very poorly of themselves, doesn't believe that they add value to the world, doesn't know who they are. I think it really is a crime, and I think because every single person has so much potential and so many good things. Like you said, like your life does impact other people's lives as well, and like it adds so much value to the world when you know who you are and you live by those values, and not the values that the world puts on you.
Absolutely. This term's called fusing. So it's this term where you're like clinging onto a certain characteristic of your identity or personality, and then you are creating that self-fulfilling prophecy oftentimes through that. And when you fuse to or cling on to something bad, like obviously that's going to generate a number of negative emotions throughout your day-to-day. But I guess understanding that your personality is fluid, your values, you know, they change over time. Your personality, I think, you know, you might have a certain set of characteristics that are going to be there for the rest of your life, and that may have been there since early childhood. However, there's a lot of things around that are very fluid. And so fusing onto negative thoughts and emotions and believing that that's part of your personality, like that's just not true. You know, that you can form different identities, and you can understand yourself as like a context in the context that you're in, instead of understanding yourself as this concept of a person, because that can lead into negative kind of clinical consequences. For example, if you're fusing yourself to this idea of like a concept of like for example, a type A academic, and that you have to fulfill that in every way, shape, and form. Yes. You know, it helps. It is healthy to try and detach from that in a number of ways.
Because you are fluid. I see what you mean there. So, you know, in the sense where I used to do this a bit when I was in high school because I was quite good at art, right? Like I'm quite good at drawing. And then all of a sudden I think I hinged that on my identity. And when I didn't achieve a good grade in art, like when I was criticized, it shattered me. Like it really, it wasn't a good feeling. And it was like, and I had a friend at the time that told me, she's like, you're not Tessa that does art. You're Tessa. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
You're bad at this one thing. It's this content. It's like you can. And so if you hold on to this, is it like maybe I'm getting the word wrong here, but schema? Or this
yes, you can hold on to a schema.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
This, some sort of ideal that this is who I am and I must fit this in every single context.
Yeah.
And when I don't, it means that I failed or that I'm bad, which then triggers like shame. And so that is important to remember, is that like you can still say, oh, I am Tessa and I'm quite good at this particular thing, but I'm not perfect at it, and I'm not always going to be. And some days I'm going to do an art piece that kind of sucks, and that is like very, very normal. But I was so, and like you said with the type A personalities, it's like if people who have received so much positive reinforcement from scholastic achievement in maybe high school, and then they come to university and the context is different and they struggle, well, then all of a sudden they must feel like there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with me because I'm meant to be good at academia and I've come to university and I just failed my first subject. Like maybe I'm a terrible person. It's like that's not, that can create so much shame and so much so much harm, you know, and that's where I think self-compassion should come in, because it is, again, it goes back to, it's like such a crime for you to feel that way. It's so wrong, and it sucks because the world will actually allow you to feel that way too. The world isn't going to come in and say, actually, no, Lera, like you're actually a good person. No, the world will sit there and be like, well, maybe you are terrible at academia.
Because that's how, for example, like if you really want to go there, I feel like that's how capitalism thrives. For example, if you have people who have relentless standards, let's take academia as an example. If you have academics who have a certain relentless standard for their work, that relentless standard is probably going to drive really good, robust research that is going to get published in higher impact papers, that's going to be disseminated in very reputable conferences, for example.
They don't care about the mental well-being of that person.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so that's ultimately going to drive a university and the amount of profits that they're making.
Right, because that's just one dimension that it sort of cares about. It's like so that's exactly right. The world that we live in, at least, is not very concerned with, it's okay if you exist and think, oh well, I'm just a terrible person because I came to university and I failed a few subjects, therefore I must be a piece of crap, you know, and the world isn't going to correct that for you. You have to correct that. The world won't. The world will let you believe that.
The world will let you believe that you're an INFJ or an ENFJ.
The world will let, and you know, and other people will reinforce that. And so it is so important. It is critical that you have your own values and that you know who you are, so that you can fail comfortably and say, that's a bummer that I failed, but I am not stupid or bad, and I am actually quite capable of doing this. I just didn't tick the boxes this time, and then there is room for improvement. Because I think failure is a wonderful thing in a way. Like it teaches you so you can learn so much more from failure than you ever can from success. So I think like it is, and any super successful person will tell you about the, like, you know, they'll tell you underneath the success there's been a lot of like failed attempts, you know. But
absolutely.
And so
no one has a linear path in life.
Yeah, but super successful people kind of know who they are too. Like truly successful people, unless they got there by like luck or someone else bankrolled them. But like I think that a lot of truly successful people have values and they understand who they are and they have self-compassion. I agree on that. I mean, there's lots of examples like that. Like for me, for example, like this was an old thing, a very old thing, but I used to fuse on like
like for example, like social media and getting like to a certain status on social media. This was a really long time ago now, but this is when I was like trying to be a content creator, and when I was I say influencer in the most inverted commas, because I think it's such a cringe term and I don't want to refer to myself to that term, but essentially that's what it was, right? And so there's what I noticed, and you might relate to this, is that when you take away what you're trying to achieve, so I deleted all social media, right? Yeah. And there was a lot of negative emotions and sensations that came out after that point, because you start to kind of grapple with the idea of like, well, what am I without this kind of particular accolade? So like, and that made me realize that process and what was going on in that in my head. So for example, if you're someone who's struggling to find out who you are or find out your values, if they're related to a conceptual thing, to an ideal conception like academia. Yeah. Like for example, if you're a really high status lawyer is another good one. It's like, well, take that away. Yeah. Then who are you beyond that? Who are you beyond
Absolutely.
that? Absolutely. And that is something that a lot of people don't take the time to do.
Right. And they wouldn't know. And yeah, going back to the world won't set that up for you. There is no, you know, like, if you ever want to read or identify values, I highly recommend like Brene Brown as like someone who, she's an emotions researcher. Her books are very centered around identifying your values. Yeah. I love her work. But I think the thing is like the values that I've identified, and you should just have a couple. You don't need like a list of like 10. You just need a couple. So for me, my one of my biggest values is courage. And bravery, because now you can strip away everything from me, but you could never strip away like the courage or bravery to face emotional adversity or some sort of difficulty, and like the bravery to do it and to be vulnerable and to be like, I'm not sure how this is going to go, but I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to see how I go. And every time that I'm being brave, regardless of the context, now you can strip away everything from me. You could take away my PhD. You could take away my like, I guess I don't have a large net worth, but you could take away all my money. You could take away everything, and then I could be. You could strip all that away from me, but you can't take away my courage or bravery to face difficult things. That is something I can hold dear to my chest, and like I can fail a number of times, but I have the bravery to get back up and try again. And that's like such an important value to me, and having that has made life a lot easier, because it's made it more comfortable for me to then receive any sort of rejection relating to like academia, right? Because we talked about academia or achievement as being like something people hinge their self-worth on. So for me now, when I do something incorrect or I don't understand something or I receive any sort of rejection, that's okay, because I understand, because I can flip the script and say, I was brave enough to give it a go, and I'm so proud of myself for giving that a go. Yeah, I didn't do well and I failed, but that's okay. But now I know something. That's
a really nice way of looking at it. Yeah, and like I get how it's super comforting, right? And like I've never done it in Brene Brown's context, right? But I know like Russ Harris, like he kind of invented a very big therapy that we call acceptance and commitment therapy. Right. Yeah, and that's, if you're interested, there's so many free resources on it, and that's his book called The Happiness Trap. Yeah. But yeah, he sort of was one of the first people to pose like, here are your set of values, and here is how you can live a life that fulfills those values and not some specific goals that you've attained based on like a conceptual self, right? Which sounds like exactly like what Brene Brown's talking about.
Yeah, you're fulfilling values, and it's not to say that goals aren't.
Goals are good.
Goals are good, like, you know, that's
short-term goals are great.
Because also the you know, that's why I like courage, because courage still, you know, it's still a brave and courageous thing to do, to try and achieve intense academic achievement, right? Like doing a PhD, there's a lot of courage and bravery that goes into that. Like, so setting goals for myself is also a form of like bravery, but they're now interlinked. But I don't do a PhD because it's a PhD. Right. I do it because it's interesting and it makes it. I love learning. Learning is another one of my values. Education is another one of my values. I value that.
Yes.
And so it's an avenue to fulfilling my values rather than to just getting a PhD so that it looks impressive.
You just highlighted a really important thing.
Right.
In terms of when you said it is something where it's something I do to fulfill my values.
Right, the goals feed in.
Yeah, because it's like if you're doing a PhD as it can be a short-term goal, but if you're doing a PhD if your value is a PhD,
right,
you're going to have a difficult time in life.
Yeah, that's hard because like anything now that goes wrong with it is hinging on your values, and it's like, well, maybe like it's starting to hurt you. So, but if you externalize it a little bit and be like, this is just one thing I do that helps me fulfill values because it helps me, people got to tinker on something, right? Whether it be like, they work on their career, or they work on having a family, or they do both. Or blah, blah, blah. You got to do something. You got to occupy yourself somehow. And there's so many different ways of doing that. But it should all link back into your values.
Yeah. I mean, like that's it, right? Like one of my values as well is like I just want to be a good person. I want to kind of have something contribute positive things to this life, and help other people. Helping others is a very big value of mine. And so no matter what I'm doing, whether that's oriented in my family, whether that's oriented in trying to show something in my clinical work or practice with people, it's always fulfilling that value in some way. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is I try to fulfill that value by going through life in a lot of aspects of my life, trying to be a good person, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's it's the fact that you're moving in that direction that's fulfilling those values. It could be you might something might happen and you might have to not practice for a while, maybe clinically or whatever. But like that's okay because you haven't hinged your self-worth on like being a therapist or being a psychologist. Exactly. But you one of your values is helping people. So you give it the best go you can, and then when life gets in the way and you have to stop for a while, due to whatever reason, you don't have to feel like your values have been hurt.
I can just be a good friend. That's
exactly.
Again, wrapping that up, really important to make a distinction between yourself as a concept. So that idea of you kind of fusing onto a certain personality characteristic or a certain accolade, or like kind of a higher order self that is just, I guess, hinged on something that's not going to drive you in life, right? And instead trying to diffuse that and detach from that and form a set of values to live by. Because I think one important distinction between values and goals is that you can never fulfill a value. You can never truly achieve a value.
You don't graduate from it. It's a
graduate from a value. It's a lifelong thing. So if you have a set of lifelong values, you can go through life in its entirety trying to fulfill them.
Absolutely. That's the other thing too, like, because the thing is you can finish a goal, like, so I was talking to a friend the other day who finished his PhD, and brilliant guy, and he was like, but he's in this lull now between like PhD and like getting a job. It's like what do I do? And so and I don't doubt that to some extent I'll feel that way, but it's like that's and I don't think my friend has experienced it to this extent, but if you do hinge your entire self-worth on the PhD, and even when you achieve it, and you might do really well, and that's okay, when you finish though, you're like, well, what's my purpose now? That could be a really like, now what do I do? Like I've run out of purpose. And it's like, that's not true, because your values, if you go back to them and you form values that are like learning and courage or like helping others, that doesn't have to stop after your PhD. Now how else can you fulfill those values? You need to find another way of doing it. So like you finish your PhD, you move on to a next phase of your life that helps you fulfill those values. But yeah, goals end. Whether or not you achieve them or you fail them, they they are short term. As values are with you for life.
Yeah, and if you're really interested in identifying your values and what they are, again, we've got resources like from Brene Brown, which I'll let you speak about. But there's a helpful exercise from Russ Harris from Acceptance and Commitment Therapy called the Bullseye.
Right.
The Bullseye, and it's like two pages, and it's kind of like a target, and you identify your values, where you're sitting at right now for those values, and ways that you can kind of change your life in order to better fulfill those values.
Totally.
Yeah. Do you have anything helpful?
No, but yes, I love Brene Brown. She's got multiple books, and I've read most of them. They're fantastic, but we can probably link some resources in. I think it's important, as you can maybe appreciate now that we've gone through like the personality test and we've talked about the self quite in depth and in quite a philosophical degree, how personality tests can't really give you the absolute complexity of who you are.
They can't encapsulate
They
you.
don't encapsulate you. I mean, we've just had this really in-depth conversation about what the self is. And, you know, and when you think about like a quick test that you can do in 15 minutes does not wrap up like who your values are. That's another important thing, is like personality tests don't tell you who tell you what your values are. You need to identify them outside of that. And you know, there are resources that can help you identify your values, but ultimately it comes from within the heart. And that is why you shouldn't use a personality test as an identity confirmer.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
Because ultimately it makes your thoughts more rigid rather than fluid. And rigid thoughts,
right.
When you're stuck in rigid thoughts, that's negative. That's going to lead to negative mental health outcomes.
Yeah.
As opposed to living by your values and going with the fluidity of day-to-day life, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right.
Alrighty, well, we might wrap up, but we'll link all the stuff that we've talked about below, and any other resources we find helpful. And thank you for listening, and tune in next week with another episode. Tessa and Lera. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you've liked this podcast, please like, subscribe or follow, and suggest some stuff that you'd like us to talk about, because you know, we're always on the lookout for topics, and we're just getting started. And please let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.